Tonight, hospitals under tremendous strain.
It seems like every other day there's a new COVID ward opened up for an expanding number of patients.
As the number of people in intensive care continues to climb, coupled with staffing shortages due to Omicron, how hospitals in the GTA are coping. Plus,
what it does tell us is an extreme stress that the system is under.
Also feeling the strain, paramedic services. The union representing them sounding the alarm after no ambulances were available during a certain time this weekend. And
it's already really hit us hard with the international visitation being cut off.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is advising against travel to Canada due to rising COVID numbers, the potential impacts of their latest recommendation. Good evening, I'm Kelda Yoon. We begin with what is no doubt music to many parents' ears. Sources tell CBC News that children in Ontario will return to the classroom for in-person learning next Monday. The province announced on January 3rd that all publicly funded and private schools would temporarily move to remote learning. Premier Doug Ford said the decision was made because the province couldn't guarantee schools would be fully staffed with so many teachers expected to be off sick. The government had said schools would reopen on January 17th. However, many have wondered if that date would be delayed. Meanwhile, children will continue to learn virtually for the rest of this week. And starting today, emergency childcare services are available for designated essential service workers in Toronto. Chris Glover has more on who is eligible.
In-person classes remain cancelled, but there's new activity at O'Connor Public School today as its childcare centre welcomes the children of essential frontline workers.
This provides best for parents. Those are working.
Parvez Etefi works and his wife is a lab technician. He just dropped off their 2 children.
We don't have anybody to take care of these kids, so when they come here, we can go to our job.
It's one of 4 city-run emergency centers launching today.
Our absolute laser focus remains on protecting essential and critical services.
In total, there are roughly 40 approved providers in Toronto now offering emergency childcare as schools are shuttered due to the punishing Omicron wave. The list of eligible parents include health workers, first responders, and pharmacy staff. The YMCA of Greater Toronto had cancelled before and after programs to the general public, redeploying staff, and is, as of today, operating roughly 50 centers for the children of essential workers. What do you think about being able to facilitate and provide these kinds of services to folks who are working on the front line and, up until today, were finding themselves juggling kids and their work?
I think that the having these types of programs does enable essential workers to be able to go to work, which includes our childcare staff, because they're vital in all of this.
The YMCA is pushing to have COVID testing available to the emergency childcare providers to ensure safety. Still, school went virtual last Wednesday, and Etefi wonders why it took until today to launch the childcare centers.
That's very important. When the school is shutting off, some families, some parents need daycare to be open right away.
He wishes these sorts of emergency responses would have been figured out by now, 2 years into this pandemic. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
Hospitals in the GTA are continuing to face a lot of pressure tonight. The number of patients in intensive care units is rising, with staff stretched to the limit due to shortages brought on by the Omicron variant. Lisa Sheng has the latest on the situation.
Facing staffing shortages and a big jump in COVID-19 patients, to say Ontario's hospitals are strained is an understatement.
Right now we're in the thick of it, and it's extremely concerning.
In Ontario, there are now 2,467 patients in hospital with COVID-19. Compare that with about 1,200 a week ago. There are currently 438 people with the illness in ICUs, nearly twice as many as last Monday.
Unvaccinated people make up the largest number of patients in the ICU, followed by people who've only had 2 shots and either are elderly or have some other medical condition.
Hospitals are rerouting resources the best they can.
everybody from physicians, nurses, researchers is on some kind of a redeployment list to help out doing something.
One big challenge this time.
The last wave, we were able to send patients out to various hospitals because there were parts of the province that weren't as affected. But right now, everyone's affected.
This all in the span of a week after Ontario implemented a modified Phase 2 lockdown, moving school online, closing indoor dining and gyms, and pausing non-urgent medical procedures. Experts say it's too soon to know the effect of those measures. And while staff at University Health Network are calling in sick, about 50 to 100 a day, there's reason to be positive.
The good news is we're now starting to see a number of those who've been off because of exposure or because of mild disease complete, test negative, and be able to come back into the workforce. So we're roughly seeing a similar number going off as we are coming back in at the moment.
The strain on the province's hospitals is expected to worsen. Officials say once the positivity rate for testing goes down, so will hospitalizations, followed by ICU admissions. Lisa Sheng, CBC News, Toronto.
The union that represents Toronto paramedics is sounding the alarm on just how dire the healthcare crisis is right now. At one point this weekend, there were no ambulances to respond to calls. They say a shortage of staff is putting a strain on the emergency response system. Greg Ross has more.
Toronto paramedics were so busy on Saturday night, their union sent out this tweet. Code red. No units available in the city at 18:38 hours tonight.
What it does tell us is an extreme stress that the system is under.
Peter Shire is the vice chair of the local 416 for the paramedics union. He says a situation like this could lead to grave consequences.
Should a mass casualty incident occur at that moment, we're going to have a very hard time in Toronto servicing those calls.
Chief Matthew Pegg, who heads up Toronto's emergency management, addressed the issue today. He says a big part of the problem is sick calls from paramedics in COVID-19 protocol.
Yesterday, our emergency and essential services operated with an average unplanned absence rate of 12.8%.
He says Omicron has also led to a higher volume of calls, and paramedics are often tied up at hospitals dealing with patient drop-offs.
There were times when more than 50 Toronto Paramedic Service ambulances were out of service in hospital, waiting to transfer their patients.
Pegg says they are actively looking for quicker ways to free up paramedics from emergency rooms. The city is hoping that firefighters can also help alleviate some of the pressure by handling some of the less urgent calls.
Urgent calls have been answered. Urgent calls will continue to be answered, and people can be reassured that we've got their backs.
Even if this most serious calls are getting done, we still have many other calls that are waiting. A lower priority call may be someone with a broken hip lying on the floor. They shouldn't be waiting for a long time for an ambulance to get to them.
Is the pandemic just magnifying problems that have existed for a long time?
Absolutely.
The paramedics union says they've faced all of these issues even before there was a pandemic.
We have been saying for 10 years that our staffing levels don't have a surge capacity built into them. So we're at bare minimum just staffing the number of ambulances on a regular day.
The union is urging the city and the province to look for long-term solutions to these issues that will extend well beyond the pandemic. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
The city has reached another milestone in its vaccination effort. 1 million Torontonians have now had their third doses. And it doesn't stop there. The city is pushing ahead with vaccine clinics in priority neighborhoods that have low vaccination rates. The city is taking what they call a hyper-local approach on this leg of the vaccination effort, rolling out vaccine clinics at Toronto community housing buildings. In some cases, they'll be set up outside. Others will operate inside lobbies. And for some residents with mobility issues, the vaccines will come right to their door. The hope is that given the number of people who live in community housing, taking vaccines to their doorstep will move the needle when it comes to the vaccination rate.
You know, community housing has over 100,000 tenants as part of it. And so, you know, we're playing a critical role in getting the vaccine rollout successfully out there.
The city has already hosted 27 vaccine clinics at Toronto community housing buildings. They plan to run 73 more over the next month and into February. The TTC says approximately 2% of their employees have been fired for not complying with their vaccination policy. Now, in total, 354 people had their employment terminated. The TTC says this will not lead to further service disruptions, and they are actively recruiting, hiring, and training new operators. In response, the union, representing over 12,000 TTC workers, says it believes these terminations are wrong and unjust, and that the TTC should provide alternative options to mandatory vaccination, such as regular COVID testing. Well, Canada's rising COVID numbers has the U.S. on alert. Today, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention advised its citizens against travel to Canada. As our Jessica Ng reports, the latest recommendation is yet another blow to the local tourism industry.
Out with Santa and in with more dreamy snow scenes. Today, Niagara Falls Tourism unveiled the second half of its Winter Festival of Lights. But with indoor dining closed and few international travelers, the impact on local tourism continues to snowball.
We're all sticking together and recognizing that it's only the experts in public health that will be able to pull us all out of this.
Now, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is advising American residents to avoid coming to Canada. It's one of 80 destinations listed as level 4, the CDC's highest COVID-19 threat level. It's not likely to help the more than 300 businesses with Niagara Falls Tourism. The head of the organization says American visitorship has yet to recover, even when travel restrictions were eased.
We haven't seen that traditional back and forth flow. And I think that speaks a lot to people's comfort levels with travel in general. They want to stay something familiar.
Thompson says luckily they've seen an uptick in visitors from this side of the border.
We had a lot of visitors coming from Quebec, and we're primarily seeing the GTA visitors.
Helping area hotels move from 90% less business to roughly 40% of their seasonal sales. The nonprofit reminding prospective visitors that hotels are open in Ontario's modified Step 2. Meanwhile, those in the trucking industry say we should prepare for significant supply chain shortages as the January 15th mandatory vaccination deadline approaches on both sides of the border.
We have 160,000 truck drivers, primarily the majority of which are Canadian, that cross the Canada-US border, moving the nearly $470 billion of an annual trade between our two nations.
The head of Ontario's Trucking Association says the new requirement will conservatively lead to
an exit rate of 12,000 truck drivers crossing the Canada-US border. We're already 20,000 short as a nation, and that's going to cause more problems.
Laskowski hopes both the U.S. and Canadian governments push back the date. And he's optimistic, a feeling shared by those in tourism.
All of the wonderful outdoor attractions are here. We'll be here when the world is ready and when it's safe.
Jessica Ng, CBC News, Toronto.
Meteorologist Colette Kennedy joins us now with a first look at the forecast. And Colette, a good day to stay inside your home. Really chilly out there.
Thanks, Kelda. Boy, I mean, it takes some getting used to, and then maybe you don't even ever get used to it when we've got some really cold air that has moved in. If I show you what's going on just with our daytime highs today, in fact, they're not quite there, but they're actually pretty similar to what would be normal lows for this time of year. So some of the readings that we have in terms of what we saw today for Toronto, -7, a high, and how about -9 into London. And then, of course, we have to add to that the fact that we've had these strong winds driving the lake effects, especially in the lee of Lake Huron, Georgian Bay, and some of those flurries even trickling down towards the GTA earlier this evening. And that's clearing away. Winds will back off, but it's still going to be an extreme wind chill tomorrow morning. And then the winds will change direction and pick up as we go into Wednesday, and that will be milder air. In the meantime, though, extreme cold warnings plus the extreme cold weather alert that we have in place for the city. Still some of those watches and warnings that have been shifting a little bit. -18, the thermometer. It is going to feel like -20 to -25 tomorrow morning. Dressing in layers is so important. We will have some sun tomorrow and then increase in cloudiness, Kelda, but that daytime high only going up again to -7. That's the best we're going to do for another day.
All right, thanks so much, Colette. Welcome back. The pandemic has canceled festivals in Toronto for close to 2 years now. Today, the city announced a funding initiative for some of them.
We do recognize as a city government the significant role that cultural festivals play in the vibrancy, livability, and prosperity of Toronto and their close relationship to the city, given reliance on city permits and services and funding.
More than $1.7 million is being allocated for the Cultural Festivals Funding Program. That can include the Caribbean Carnival, Indigenous Arts Festivals, and other similar events. Applications for the program open today and close on February 11th. Funds will be released to successful applicants in April. Well, now to a CBC News exclusive. Millions of dollars are missing in an alleged COVID-19 related Ponzi scheme. And so is the Toronto businessman accused of masterminding it, with angry creditors, their lawyers, and underworld figures unable to locate him or their money. Samantha Beattie has the details.
Businessman Mark E. Cohen is accused of stealing at least $12 million from more than a dozen Toronto area investors. He's facing 3 lawsuits and his whereabouts remain a mystery. He hasn't been seen at his North York home in months, according to documents filed in court, or this nearby office building where he registered his business. Some investors have turned to police and civil lawyer Justin Anisman.
As far as we're aware, he hasn't fled the country, but you're right, we haven't been able to locate him in person.
CBC News has learned others who invested have ties to illegal gambling rings in Woodbridge, and they've gone looking for him and his family members. They've made threats demanding their money back and Cohen's whereabouts. The lawsuits allege Cohen and other defendants took advantage of the pandemic-triggered vehicle shortage last year. He promised he'd use investors' money to resell cars to dealerships for huge profits. But the lawsuits say cracks appeared last summer when Cohen stopped making payments to investors.
We have not seen any evidence to suggest that this car scheme was in fact real, but rather that somebody was collecting this money and basically using this money to pay off investors, to trickle this money through.
Throughout the fall, investors became increasingly frantic trying to track down Cohen. One texted him to demand what was going on with a promised order of used cars from Quebec. Another investor says in an affidavit he discovered the TD bank accounts associated with Cohen's car business. And the money had been drained around the same time Cohen stopped responding to phone calls and texts.
My clients allege, at least as of this time, that no one has earned any profit from this scheme, that everybody are big losers.
Cohen hasn't filed a statement of defense and did not provide a comment for this story. Next month, lawyers will seek a so-called Mariva injunction against him.
It is very powerful if there's money in Canada because the banks are then required to disclose that information.
At this point, there's no indication where either the money or Cohen are. Samantha Beattie, CBC News, Toronto.
Let's go back to Colette now. And Colette, a bit of relief from the cold midweek, but for the most part, it is going to be darn chilly.
Well, Kelda, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, the extreme cold weather alerts that are in place. We haven't seen air this cold since back in, not last February. How about the one before that? Or at least when we're talking about going down to -20, it was Valentine's Day of 2020 when that happened. Didn't exactly warm your heart, did it, back then? And here we are. So it does take a little bit of adjusting to. We have those alerts in place. We will get a rebound, short-lived though. Talk about a weather roller coaster, because that's Wednesday. And then at the end of the week, we're going to return to some colder air pushing in place. So some of those overnight temperatures, as you see it running through, and that cold air dropping down. The wind gusts, so they've been certainly strong today and tonight, driving some of those lake effects. They will back off tomorrow, but then they switch directions and will go around towards the south, and then they'll become strong again from that direction. That's what's going to help push us up on Wednesday once we get there. But in the meantime, still having to deal with some of this lake effect that will back off, and Cloud cover, yeah, we'll have some of it. So there'll be some sunshine. I know that doesn't make it feel a little bit better when there's at least some sun with the extreme cold, but tomorrow afternoon we'll be seeing increasing cloudiness and then becoming overcast with flurries as we go into Wednesday. And speaking of snowfall amounts, that day, just a dusting, in some cases maybe up to 2 to 3 centimeters throughout that day, especially later in the day. Your temperatures tonight, there's a look at them. But know that those wind chills, and this will be for tomorrow morning too, minus 19 to minus 25. Daytime highs still well below zero for tomorrow and around the Golden Horseshoe. Here we go with a look at those wind chills again, minus 20 to minus 25. And then tomorrow it's a struggle to warm up. So that's why those daytime highs look more like overnight lows. And then as we get towards Wednesday, hey, that's when we get that one day where we go above freezing, so 1 degree with the flurries. Still not bad into Thursday, you'll notice. However, Kelda, we do have to look towards the end of the week as well, and that's when that cold air is going to dip right back in again. So, yeah, January is really feeling like January, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. Thanks so much, Colette. Finally tonight, picture a sea creature shaped like a dolphin, but larger than an adult orca. That's the size of a fossil recently found in the East Midlands of England. What first looked like some big old rusted pipe turned out to be the long vertebrae of an ichthyosaur. The 180-million-year-old fossilized remains were found by a team during a routine draining of a lagoon island. This specimen measures 10 meters, but the prehistoric predator was known to grow more than twice that length. Commonly known as sea dragons, these marine reptiles went extinct around 90 million years ago. And that's our show for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Dwight Drummond has your next local newscast tomorrow at 6. I will see you back here tomorrow night at 11. Have a great night.